Hi, welcome to this video. So sorry for not making any other videos for probably months now, despite all that procrastination about doing one a week and so on. Clearly, I failed dismally at that. Hopefully, you might have seen me on the Sonic State podcast. Goes every week on a Wednesday. If you don't follow Sonic State, then well worth following, actually. Check it out, sonicstate.com or Sonic State on Facebook. And every now and then I go on there and talk rubbish about synthesizers and technology. However, hopefully we're a bit back on track now. So guess what this video is about? Yes, it's the Deluge again. And I promise, really do promise, I'm going to make some videos about stuff that isn't about the Deluge as well one day, hopefully very soon. Incidentally, I'd really like to do some live streams if possible, and do some Q&As and stuff, and maybe get some people in chatting and asking actual questions. I've got a feeling that might be easier than making videos like this, and possibly more helpful. So if you can follow the channel, I know it sounds ridiculous, that would really help. You need 1,000 followers in order to live stream now, and I'm not quite at that limit. I'm getting there, at that level rather. So if you do fancy it, helping me out, just if you haven't done it already, just follow me. That would be really awesome. Anyway, this one's about the Deluge, particularly multi-sampling, and what multi-sampling is, but actually how easy it is to do on the Deluge, and how awesome actually you can get some sounds if you've got some analog kit or some stuff you want to sample into it. It really is quite a simple process, and I don't think many people are doing it because at first sight it's a real pain. You need a computer really to really do it simply, and I'll show you how. It's probably too much to expect you to be able to get good multi-samples purely by using the input and the bits and pieces on here, but I know some people have. However, to do it super simply and super quickly, I'll show you a way to do it. Firstly, a really quick background on sampling, so you kind of understand why it's necessary. I'm sure loads of people know this already, but just in case. The first kind of sampling, technically sampling, was probably using reel-to-reel tape recorders like that, where let's say you'd recorded on a multi-track some great backing vocals on the first chorus, and you wanted to spin them in later down the line for the second chorus and the third chorus. You'd probably just run them off onto a Revox tape machine like that, fast forward the other tape, and then spin them back on, much the same way as, even by hand, right, synchronizing it all up, so much the same way as beat matching two records on decks. And that's kind of the first idea of taking a chunk of audio and moving it or manipulating it or changing it and so forth. I use my reel-to-reel actually as an echo machine, as a delay machine, because you can send a signal into it and it will delay it and play it back out to you off the tape, so you get this lovely tape compression and some really great delay out of it. So they're also used as effects machines. Incidentally, if you get two of those machines playing the same thing synchronized together, you can get brilliant flanging and chorus effects just by slowing one down. So if you touch the reel on one so it slows down with your hand, that's where you get that amazing flange sound. And it's called flange because the edge of the reel here is called a flange, so that's where flange come from. Anyway, there's a factoid of the day. The first time I think digital sampling kind of came about was probably from digital delay machines, ironically, with that being used as a delay machine. So the echo delays that started being made had a little bit of memory on them, and they would continuously record audio coming in, and they'd play it back, half a second or a second later. So it's really like just a buffer. You play audio in one end, it carries on till it gets to the other end, half a second later, and out it comes. And technically that was sampling kind of in real time, just recording constantly and playing out constantly a little bit later. And people realized that if they could freeze the audio that was in that buffer rather than just continually let it cycle and trigger playing it, they had an early sampler. So I think first time I came across it, there was a multi-effects unit, one of the first effects units that was almost affordable for people like me. It was a Yamaha SPX 90. Some people still use them in studios today. And that had a half-second sample in it where you could record something into it and then trigger it, either with an audio trigger or by pressing a button. And one of the most common uses of those really was quite often with drum sounds. So you could record an amazing snare albeit into half a second or a second. If you could afford something larger like an AMS delay, that had a lot more time in it. But record this brilliant snare, and then when your drummer is playing and you've recorded your drummer's snare, you can use the sound of his snare to trigger your sample and replace his snare with a sample coming out of the delay machine, or more likely just fade up the sample underneath his snare, so you still get that nice feel of the velocity changing as he hits the drum, but you bolster it up and underneath. And things like the Deluge, every sampler on earth does that basic sampling. So for example, if I make a new kit, I won't show you in detail all the button presses and so forth. There's another video I did on sampling that shows it to you. I'm just going to hold it up here for now and do things quickly. So if you check out the other video about sampling. But very quickly, what I've done is I've created a new kit. I've got the sound here, and it's ready to go. All I need to do is record into it. So I hold this button down, hit the record and go one. Stop that. There's a sample. So that's exactly like recording something into an echo machine. Now the early days, that was it. You were stuffed. So I've actually got a gap at the beginning, so that would be really useful to play a snare. However, on the Deluge, just like most other things, I can go in and I can adjust the start point. So here you can actually see the waveform on the screen, which is pretty cool, and I can zoom in and zoom out, and you can see that this line is where I'm starting the sample. So if I adjust that start point, it is a little bit difficult doing this and trying to look into a camera at the same time. If I go too far, that'll do. It's a bit choppy. That shows you how easy. It also shows you actually how good these buttons are. People say, oh, there's no display, no proper display on the Deluge. These buttons are the display. And it's very, very easy and simple to get some basics done like that. Anyway, so I come back out of that. There is my sample. That's all you could ever do in the early days of sampling. Then what they discovered was that, particularly with delay machines again, when you adjust the delay setting, the length of time that echo takes to come back, what you're actually doing is speeding up and slowing down the speed of the buffer. So as you speed up the buffer, it gets to the end faster and faster and faster, or slower as you slow it down. And if you do that, then you can change the pitch of that sample. So again, we can go in, excuse me, we can go in, transpose it, and all that, which has a novelty value of around about 2 minutes, I guess. At least for my 7-year-old daughter it does, and then it's all over. So there are a few records around that make use of that as well. Obviously you've probably heard a few, but the novelty does wear off quite quickly. So suddenly you've got the ability to manipulate that sound, and clearly people then thought, well, hang on a minute, we can play that like an instrument. We can stick that sound, and instead of twisting this dial, we can play it across pads or a keyboard, and suddenly we've got an instrument. So maybe we could sample in a piano and make that piano work across the whole keyboard. You can do that on the Deluge as well. Obviously there's a keyboard built in. Now clearly that doesn't really work very well, because even with my voice, as soon as you go very far from the pitch at which, so to speak, that I spoke into the machine, it goes wrong. It's quite okay right around the point at which I was speaking at, but as soon as you go more than a few semitones away, you're entering an area which is just not realistic. And part of that is because as you speed it up, the sample gets shorter. So as well as going up in pitch and sounding like Mickey Mouse, it's shortening the whole length of what's playing back. So it just sounds completely wrong. So the next development that came along was time stretching. And the first time I saw that was the Akai S1000 sampler, which kind of changed the game with time stretching algorithms. And that meant that as you sped up a sample, you could stretch it without changing the pitch, and that would compensate for the fact that it was getting shorter. And equally, as you slowed it down, this sample was getting longer and longer to play back. You could shorten it without changing the pitch, and that would compensate for it. Again, most samplers in existence, the Deluge included, will do that. So if we go in and just check pitch time, at the moment they're linked pitch time, so that means as you change the pitch, the time will change. If I switch it to independent, what happens is the Deluge will automatically work out how much to stretch the sample or compress it to compensate for the change in pitch. Whoops, and I need to do that by changing the transpose button. So let me go back in and do that. So transpose is here.
1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
So it's getting better. If we go up a bit,
1, 1, 1.
Clearly it's not realistic,
1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
but it sounds better. And it also kind of goes further away from the root note that you sampled it on.
1, 1, 1, 1.
And, you know, various algorithms, some algorithms are better than others. You know, I think you don't even have to tap a button in GarageBand, for example, when you're dragging samples in now, and they just automatically fit into the right tempo or to the right pitch. It's true, though, that the further you get away from the root note, the worse it gets. You know, you can't sample a single note on a piano and expect it to work across the whole range without artifacts coming in fairly soon. They work well on noisy samples and samples with transients like drum loops. Classically, you can get away with a lot. Sometimes those effects and the artifacts that get introduced to the sound make for a better, more crunchy sounding sample, so they can be used creatively as well. But in general, you've got to think again if you actually want to create an instrument, and that is where multi-sampling comes in. So somebody, if I flip to a picture of a keyboard, someone decided or suggested, once things became samples, as in the MPC 60s and the S900s from Akai, they thought that we can actually multi-sample this stuff. So if we took a sample for every single note on this piano, for example, and then we told the sampler, if I press this key to play back that sample, and this key to play back that sample, and this key, and so on and so on and so on, we would get a really realistic piano. It would take ages, and we'd end up with huge amounts of samples, but it would sound really good. The only problem that you face after that is with a piano in particular. If I hit a note hard, it sounds different to if I hit the note softly. It's not just quieter, it's less bright, it has a different transient on it. In fact, piano forte, the real name of a piano, means soft loud. It was one of the first instruments that you could play softly and loudly. Because before that you had things like harpsichords which plucked a string inside at the same amount of pluck on every tap. So anyway, factoid number 2, there you go. If you want to do it properly for a piano, what you also have to do is you sample all of the range of notes that you want at a loud pitch or a loud hit, and then you do it all again at less of a hit, and all again at less of a hit. And the more samples at different velocities that you take, the more layers, the more realistic the sound. And that's now, those are called velocity layers within your sample. Now the Deluge will manage a couple of velocity layers. Other things like contact and computer-based stuff, the SX24 in Logic can handle loads. I'm not sure if there's actually a limit, it's probably like 64 or something. And that's why you see some quite phenomenal contact libraries out there. From one of the most recent ones I've tried out has been from Spitfire. They do a lot of amazing orchestral stuff, and they're just sampled. Every single note is sampled at various different levels. It's just incredible what they've managed to do, and it's very, very realistic. However, 1 or 2 velocity zones is absolutely fine, especially if you're looking at trying to sample analog synths or drums and that kind of stuff. And for the Deluge to offer it, and it offered it at a relatively recent sample, a relatively recent firmware update, is a great thing. So the other thing just to mention is you don't necessarily have to sample every single note. You know, like I said before, that if you're just around the root of what you sampled at, so if you've sampled this note, it's pretty good around the range around it. So you can get away normally with sampling that note, pitching it over that range, and then starting another note up here and pitching it over the next range, and then here and pitching it over the next range. So a complete keyboard span like this, you might get away with 18 or 20 notes that then merge across. Piano is notoriously difficult, but if you were sampling an analog synth, which is fundamentally an oscillator running at different frequencies anyway, you can get away with that very, very easily. So all that's left is to work out how on earth we take a sound from a synth and multi-sample it as quickly and as simply as possible to be able to be dumped in here to come up as a synth when you hit the synth button. And this is where the computer comes in. Okay, so just to recap what we actually need to do, to make this multi-sample, we need to be able to play every note that we wish to sample, which is probably going to be every 5 or 6 notes up the keyboard, starting at the lowest note we need to sample, ending at the highest note. We need to record each one, and we need to have played these notes at exactly the same velocity. And then also, which I haven't mentioned, we need to find a loop point. Now, a loop point is important because if you want to hold down a chord for ages, if you haven't sampled each individual note for ages, it's just going to run out of sample to play, so it's going to die off halfway through. And the way we get around this, because clearly you can't sample every note for 5 minutes, is you find a loop point within the sound, which you can repeat, you can run as a loop, and you don't notice where the loop's occurring. Now that's super trivial with, say, a drum loop, because you simply loop back to the start of the beat and it just runs, and that's the way drum loop sounds. It's quite hard to do potentially with pianos and some strings, because the natures of their sound means that they're constantly different as the sound goes on. It's reasonably easy to do with synth sounds, because in general those sounds tend to be repetitive. After the initial transient and weird and wonderful beginning bit of that sound, it generally settles down to something that can potentially be looped. So anyway, it's much easier to do that with a computer using an algorithm rather than kind of editing start and end points and trying to get it right. And computers will also crossfade nicely over those loop points to try and smooth things out even more. Now, the software that I'm going to use to do that is, in this case, MainStage. MainStage is an Apple product. It's got the Logic engine inside it, and it has auto sampling built in. There are some others. There is a free sampler, a free sample manipulating multi-sampler called External Resampler by Tom Cosm. That gets really good reports. I haven't tried it. It's very Ableton-centric. Definitely worth trying, and it's completely free as I understand it. There's also Sample Robot, which I've tried out, which was really good. It has really good looping built into it. Worked great on my laptop, but I couldn't quite make it work here in the studio where there's more than one audio device around. It didn't seem to get on with all of the audio devices. Soundlib Sampler is one I've heard of but not tried. And just this MainStage as well, which is $30 from Apple. It does a whole lot of other stuff. MainStage, it's very performance oriented. It's like a performance version of Ableton Live, so it's more geared towards people with keyboards and lots of outboard and soft synths that need to set up their live rig and have everything click to the right patch and the right level when they just press one button, whereas Ableton Live is kind of more clip playing and almost DJ oriented, I guess. However, it has this auto sampling built in. And the history of that was there was a company called Redmatica that was around a few years ago who made this amazing auto sampling come sample editing manipulation program for the Mac, which I used. A lot of people use. It wasn't that well known, to be honest. And then they disappeared overnight. And it turned out they'd been bought by Apple. And I don't know the inside story, but I believe the guys that worked for them went on to Apple to help them out with implementing some of this stuff with MainStage and probably some other stuff. They're very, very, very smart people. So back to MainStage. What you can do here, and I'll just show you very quickly the way we can multi-sample, is I can add a software instrument. In this case, let's grab this Juno 106, which is probably going to appear on a different monitor here, so I'll drag it down for you. This is a Roland Cloud Juno 106. We'll use a soft synth just to start with, kind of cheating, I suppose. We'll open this up so that it's really just kind of fat oscillators. And I'm going to flip it into unison. Now that's very loud, so I'm going to turn it down. Now the thing about unison mode is unison here will only allow one note at a time. It locks all 6 oscillators within the Juno 106 simultaneously as one note, so you get a fatter sound. As we're sampling it, it doesn't matter. We're going to sample each note and then we can play them polyphonically again. So I'm guessing this is going to be a huge, ridiculous, fat sound, but worth a try. So that's the Juno set up. The Juno is on this channel here. To actually sample it, all we need to do is add an audio effect, which is called Auto Sampler. That's kind of why I don't really understand why it doesn't exist within Logic, to be honest. So here is our sound. We're actually seeing some background noise from the Juno. Now, what that looks like, the Junos have got notoriously noisy chorus. And it looks like Roland's emulation is emulating that noise. If I turn the chorus off, then the noise disappears. To be fair, the chorus is brilliant on the Juno. It's actually what makes it as good as what it is, but I can't stand that noise on it. There may be a switch somewhere on here that switches off the emulation, but I'm not going to bother looking for it now. And to be honest, we're sampling such a fat sound you won't notice that because we're not playing it in silent mode. Okay, so really quickly, this is all that you need to do to get a sound multi-sampled, and the files it produces at the end are just simple audio files that you can drag onto the flash drive of the Deluge and they will just work. This is truly as simple as it gets. We've told it here, or by default, it's going to sample from C1 to B5. It looks like C6 to me, actually. No, B5. C1 to B5, that's good enough range for us. We're going to sample every 6 semitones, and it's highlighted. So this one, this one, this one. So like I said before, the range is close enough not to have to sample every single key. You can do if you want to. Round robin is irrelevant here. It allows you to sample the same note a number of times and just randomly pick one. That's useful for analog synths or drum machines where every time you play a note it sounds slightly different, gives it a bit more variance. Deluge doesn't actually support that anyway at the moment, and so we'll leave that off. I'm going to make each sample 5 seconds long just to save on a bit of disk space. 1 velocity layer, so we're only going to play one version of each of these notes at full blast at 127 velocity. Juno's not actually velocity sensitive anyway, but for now it's easy enough to get the Deluge to play 1 velocity. We're going to add a loop, so we're going to say search with crossfade for a loop automatically, and we're going to have the loop starting 40% into the sample and ending before it gets to 90% of the sample. So that just places it, tells it to find a loop in the second half-ish of the sound. So any transients or any different weird noises at the beginning or anything that makes the Juno sound unique at the beginning of the sound aren't going to get involved with the loop. And that's it. You can leave those as your defaults for everything if you want. When you're ready, you hit sample. It will ask you where it wants to save the patch. I've already been experimenting, so I'm going to call this one just Juno on its own. I'm going to make a folder called Juno so we know which one. And I'm going to name the patch Juno. Now it's saving an EXS file. That is an EXS24 sampler file. That's a sampler inside Logic. It's irrelevant to us. We can use this sample with Logic if we want as an EXS24 sample, but what we're actually interested in is the audio files that get saved as well as this EXS file. We can ignore that for now, but we still need to tell the computer somewhere to put it. Now, you don't have to sit through it all. I've whizzed it forward to get to this stage, but basically what it's done, it's recorded every single note that we want, worked out a loop point, saved it all, given us an EXS file for free. All we need to do is go and grab the audio files themselves, drag them onto the Deluge drive, and tell the Deluge to play them as a multi-sample. And it's really that simple. You don't have to do anything else. So the one, I suppose, slightly difficult thing is knowing where the audio files live. Where you told it to save the EXS file is not where it saved the audio files. You would have thought so, but if we go in and find the Juno folder, here's our EXS file that we can use to play the file in Logic, but the actual audio files are saved in Music, at least on this system, in Music under Audio Music Apps, in Samples, Auto Sampled, and then in Juno. And here we have AIF files, neatly named with the notes that they were recording and the velocity that they were recorded at, and a kind of random string at the end, so that they don't ever get copied over if you ever do it again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just save these onto the Deluge flash drive, and then get the Deluge to import them, and then we will have a multi-sample of the Juno that fast, and then we can go and do it for any number of instruments that we want. I'll add a couple more quickly so you can get the idea and play a few things through on it. So get yourself a copy of MainStage if you haven't got one already, or try out External Resampler by Tom Cosm for free. Maybe do that first. I just happen to have a copy of MainStage already, which is why I like using it. Grab these files. AIF files, 24-bit, 48K, I think these have been saved at. What you really want to do actually is save them 44.1K, AIF or WAV 24-bit, because the Deluge works at 44.1 naturally. It'll work with these, but you're making the Deluge kind of work a bit harder to play them if you're not using 44.1. I'll just drag them onto the Deluge. I'll show you how to do that, and we'll just import them, and we're off. Okay, so the little memory card in the Deluge is just at the front. Pop it out with your nail. There you go. I've got a little adapter on the Mac that just allows me to plug it in. You can see that, yeah, it looks like that. Plug it in whichever way around it goes. There you go. Loads it up. If I flip over to the screen, this was where I've got my Juno samples that were in audio music applications. We've now got the Deluge drive. So this is what a Deluge drive looks like. Most of you who've got a Deluge will know already, but just in case you're thinking of getting one, kits, samples, songs and synths. It's just a standard directory structure. So if we want to add some samples, I'll go into samples. Here they all are. You can arrange them however you want in terms of folders. I'm going to make a folder called Wiggly. And inside Wiggly, I'm going to make a folder called Juno. Let's make it Juno 106. Juno 106. And then literally all I have to do in here is drag in the files. Just copy them onto the drive. Bang, bang. And then we're good to go. So we get rid of the Deluge folder, put it out, and plug it back in the Deluge, and then we can go and check it out and see what kind of a sound we've made. Right, back in the real world, we're going to load the sample up into the Deluge, tell it to play a multi-sample, and we should be done. I'm not going to zoom in on the Deluge and show you how bit by bit, because it's so simple. Another time maybe I'll do a sort of close-up on this kind of stuff. But what I'm going to do, Shift Synth to make a new kit. There's a new kit, it's number 305. Then I'm going to hold down one of the pads and I'm going to say load. It says bottom to top. That means load a sample from the bottom to the top. Not sure if you can see that, but hopefully it's there. That's landed in a bunch of samples that I've used before. So I'm going to go back and find the folder, the Wiggly folder that we saved everything in. So that will be here. So let's go through, find Wiggly. There you go. There's Wiggly folder. In there is the Juno 106 folder, and in there are the samples, so you can hear a preview of one of the samples. Now all you have to do now is hold that down until it says mult for multi, push it again, and it will load those samples as a multi, and it's done. Literally, it's done. So that Juno is now a multi-sample loaded Juno file. Now that's a pretty simple one because it is a synth sound that we had already to start with. But you can see how simple it is. You've just effectively saved out 10 odd samples from MainStage, which took you about a minute to sample automatically once you dropped the soft synth in, and we've now ended up with a perfectly imported multi-sample. And you saw the Deluge takes less than a second to map it all out. The Deluge actually senses the pitch of the sample and maps it as well. It will take into consideration the names of the samples sometimes, but fundamentally it analyzes the pitch of the sample that's been taken. So even if you get the names wrong, it will still lay it out nicely. That's a good synth sound. Now what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to sample a couple of external analog synths that I've got, give that a go as well, see what we end up with, and then maybe try and put some kind of tune together with it. But I won't let you sit through all of the sampling. I'll just show you the synths I'm going to sample, just a couple of them, hit go, come back, and then we'll load them up and see what we've got. Okay, so I've just got a couple of external synths set up. I've got, if I switch it on over here, yeah, it's on. I've got a Prophet 6. It's making a kind of weird sound. This one has a long decay up the top and a short decay at the bottom, which is the opposite way round if you were speeding up and slowing down a single sample as a sample instead of a multi-sample. So that's kind of a good one to try. And then the other thing I've got, if I flip over to this one, is an MKS 80 playing a nice little bass patch. So I'll just bring that up a little bit. So there you go. Those are my tips for multi-sampling on the Deluge, and how Mainstage anyway makes it so easy to put together multi-samples. What I'll do really quickly now is just show you a close-up on the Deluge of how I imported those samples, just in case you missed the buttons and the way that I did it, and we'll just check out how they sounded. Okay, so here's the Deluge looking very bright. If I do Shift Learn and turn this down, it turns down the brightness of the buttons. That's looking a little bit better. Now what I want to do is load up the 3 multi-sampled synth patches that I created into new synth patches. So I'm just going to say new song. There's a brand new empty song. And I'm going to say new synth patch. That gives me an empty synth patch with just sort of single oscillator sound ready to load. It's also given me 307 as the next available slot to save this synth if I like it and I want to save it. And then just to load the samples, it's really simple. I hold down one of the buttons here, any of these, hit load, and I just need to find the samples on the drive that I saved out. First thing it says is bottom to top, because I want to load the samples from the bottom to the top of the keyboard. So I say yes. And I then need to find the Wiggly folder that I created, which is probably up the end. There it is. In there I should have my Juno, I should have my MKS 80, and I should have my P6, my Prophet 6. So we'll take the Juno first. All I do is I go into the folder, and to load all of those samples in that folder as a multi-sample, I just hold this down until it says multi and hit it again. And that is ready. So the Deluge has analysed the pitch of all those samples in that folder. It's laid them out perfectly and it's ready to go. So that's perfect. I'm just going to save that into a slot, the number 307, I guess. So I'm going to say save into, well, let's make it 400, and it's really easy to remember. Save. Done. So patch number 400 is my Juno sounds. What I'll do now is I'm going to make a brand new synth ready for the next one. New synth, set it at 401, ready for me to save the next one. Empty slot, hit load, bottom to top, thank you very much. Now let's find the MKS 80 sound. There it is. Load it down, multi, boom, there we go. And if we drop the octave on this a little bit, it's a really nice MKS 80 sample without really having to do much to it at all. So I'll save that. 401, thank you very much indeed, all done. So now I have my Juno and my MKS 80. Lastly, new synth, shift new, ready to go, hold it down, load, find my P6, hold it down, multi, Bosh, loaded again. So there's my P6, that kind of slightly weird and wonderful sounding percussive noise. Again, so I'll save this, say 402, done. So now, once again, that's the Juno, there's the MKS, and there you go. There's the P6. So those are my samples, my multi-samples ready to go. It really was that simple. It does all the work for you. So that's how fast it is to load up multi-samples like that. You can see I did it kind of with one hand earlier, but it is a lot easier to see what's going on if I focus in on the Deluge. I'll have a quick play around, see what we can come up with those sounds and see what the filters and so forth sound on them. And that's basically it for the video. Okay, so let's take a listen to the sounds that we've made. Here is a super bright Deluge. If you say press shift and learn and turn the down knob, then the brightness of the pads changes, which is great. New song, thank you very much. Generic kind of house beat, vital for every YouTube demo. Whoa, there you go. Then what we should do, just add a few little bits, I think. Cool. Okay, so stop playing around with that. There's a kit. Let's go for the Juno pad quickly. Turn the filter down. Put in a chord. I'm going to make this a 2-bar pattern. And for the second bar, I'm going to change the chord. So there's the first bar. Here's the second bar. That's cool. For this synth, I'm going to take the attack down a bit. And the release up a bit. Just to smooth it out. Right, back into the song. Let's put in the bass, MKS80, new synth. Make sure that's loud enough. I'm going to go back into the song, turn that down a bit while we're working on this. If I put cross screen on, that allows me to make any changes I want in this 1-bar sequence, and it'll be copied across to the second bar. But what I actually need is this synth. Minor key. And I forgot to put cross screen on, so there you go. Okay, so I've got a slightly different pattern going on in the second half. Sounds good. Volume of the bass comes down a little bit. Then we can go back and look at this pad. I can put some sidechain on it. good. Bit of delay. And then if I play around with the filters, and the only thing we've forgotten about is the sort of Tommy P6 feel. Let's go back onto there, find the P6. You want really, but it's sounding pretty cool. Just as a very, very basic, completely sampled from scratch operation. So thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you got this far, thank you. I'd really appreciate it if you could follow this page, follow me on here. I'm trying to get it together to do some live streaming and at least do some kind of Q&As, or if there's people in the chat that want to ask questions or see demos of stuff. I think that would be a good idea. It's also, I think, easier than making videos like this that you kind of have to do a bit of editing with and so forth. So, but you need, I think, 1,000 subscribers, and I haven't got that many yet. It's been increasing. Part of the problem is I haven't actually really made any videos for ages, so I'll fix that. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already subscribed, that would be fantastic. Look at Sonic State if you don't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks very much. Take care.